Good morning, guys. This is just to cover, again, a very short insight slash overview. And I just wanted to cover this in a slightly different direction. I've covered a lot of the same content over the last couple of videos, but I think this is just going to give it a little bit more sense as to where we are and why. So first things first, I'm going to stick the fib extension tool straight into the monthly time frame. Okay, so the one question I have is, are we still in the monthly 2 to 3, or could we assume that that has finished and we're actually coming down for the ABC 3 to 4 move on that monthly time frame? Okay, so I'm just going to stick this in. I'll come back and edit the numbers in a second. So I'm going to stick the magnet tool on now from here, and then I'm going to take this to the high and I'm going to come down to the low, giving us an ABC move, something like this, which in terms of just the Fibonacci extension, what I'm looking for is the extension above the 2618. So I'm just going to use this and put the value at 0 just to give me the exact levels. So we can actually make the assumption that this does qualify for a 3 move over. I'm just going to change this to a bit thicker, put this into white. So we actually can classify this as a 3 if we were purely looking at this monthly time frame. Okay, so kind of as clear as day, if we start at a 0 level, up for a 1, down for a 2, up for a 3, which means we would be looking to see an A, a B, and a C move, giving us the 4, which means at the moment we've had the A, we're currently having the B, which could top out here, and then ultimately moving down. Okay, so that would be the assumption, giving us a much bigger 5 as a bullish run overall. We'd expect from here, up something like this. I'm not going to go into the extension levels on that yet. That's not the purpose of what I'm trying to do with this particular stream. So in this instance, excuse me, in this instance, what we're actually looking at is whether or not we can now confirm one of two things. Is this the weekly or the monthly? That's kind of question one. The second thing is, if this is the monthly, how deep could the actual C leg finish off? Now, again, we are in Bitcoin. This is retail hype. There's a lot of kind of eyes on this particular market or instrument in particular, and therefore it's not going to always be as respectful as some of the more established instruments and tools such as gold and a lot of the forex pairs, for example. So this is some of the logic on the monthly time frame. Now, another thing that I like to use a lot is that going back in terms of, again, for me, I've been investing in Bitcoin since around 2011. I've been trading 21 years. And one of the things that I saw, from 2011 through to 2018, even 19 really, was the, I suppose, lack of institutional interest. And I don't mean just the trader level. I think in terms of venture capital, family offices, I think Bitcoin was kind of still finding its feet. So I don't really take much into account from really this kind of level. Anything kind of prior that was basically hype, kind of whiz kids on the computer and a few lucky guys that, were in early. I count myself lucky with what I've done myself with Bitcoin, but I think ultimately the real true kind of big money, if you will, the institutional money. But with that being said, if we look at the kind of levels, and like I said, I use this trick quite a lot in terms of Weiss. If we look at the potential moves here, now we could assume this being the 1 move, we could assume that being the 2. And again, part of the reason and the logic as to why I would use this as the 2 is that it lines up perfectly with the 1-2 move, in the chart itself. Now, we could assume this being the 3, which means on a monthly time frame, the red would give us the A. The little green you can see right at the bottom, if I can zoom in or pull this up a little bit. The green that you can see right at the bottom there we'd actually say this could give us the B, which means, you know, B might not even be finished just yet. There's nothing confirming that as a whole. It's just the fact that we've had a nice move from it. And therefore, I'd expect to see any which way. So yeah, I can justify this as a 3. Okay, so there's kind of the logic and the reason behind why we could classify this as the monthly 3 being complete, and therefore we are now in still the 3 to 4 move on the monthly time frame. Okay, so that's one. Now, I'm not saying that this is now bearish and this is the way it's going to be. I'm just trying to kind of decipher which of the options that we're sitting in, why we're sitting in, and some of the logic as to why we're actually sitting in these moves. Okay, so that's option 1 for the monthly. Now I'm just going to get rid of some of these. Let me get this, clean up the chart a little bit. Okay, now the next option, let me get this one back. So the next option is that where we are within this move, if we were to assume that we have a 1, 2, 3 move, so I'm just going to put this down for 0. We're going to come 1, we're going to come 2, we're going to come 3. Let's assume that this was 4. We then have the extension up for the 5, yeah? Now I'm going to make this a bit thicker. So clear as day, that is our current monthly situation, and that is option 1. I'm not saying that's exactly where we are. I'm saying we've got to take this and keep this in the back of our mind when we're trying to work out now what we're seeing on the monthly time frame. So on the weekly time frame, we have a slightly different situation. Obviously, it's this fractal, which means we come in from roughly the 2. We're going to go 2 up here, which gives us the 1 inside that move. We're going to go 2 here, which is the low. Now we could argue 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to change this to something like a yellow, and actually I'm going to use this as a primary. So I'm going to take this down into something a little bit small. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit higher than this. Let's go to the minor. So ultimately, can we justify this? Can we use the extensions in the same way that we've done in terms of the monthly? And can we figure out whether or not this gives us something acceptable? So the 1, 2 move was definitely acceptable. We had a massive extension for 3. So again, that could easily tick the box. I'm going to check in a second whether or not this is a decent enough move for the 3. And overall, yeah, we could say a 4, 6, 1, 8. You know, this was big money coming into the market, you know, from kind of 2018 onwards. And therefore, we could justify this as a move on the weekly as a 5. Okay, so I'm not saying it's this one or the other. It's just trying to, you know, like I said, pick out which one, why, and what the options are, regardless of which one we're actually in. So let's assume that this is the option and this could be the first option. Now, the second option would give us a very similar, or if not identical, 1, 2 move. And we could assume this being the 3, this down for a 4, and up for a 5 on the weekly. And I'm going to change that just to a slight different color, being orange. Okay. Now, this particular one gives us another, so I'm going to put the orange one in with a line. The settings, I'm going to put this in there. I'm going to make this line a little bit thinner. Okay, so if we were to say that this was the scenario rather than the yellow count, now what we have to take into consideration here is that we're actually still likely to be in that corrective move 3 to 4 in terms of the orange current situation. And the reason I feel that is that we've actually got a overbought situation on the weekly stochastic, meaning it's likely to carry on down still a bit further, which means if we were to assume either the monthly ABC or potentially the weekly move 3 to 4 weekly, we would actually be seeing either this being an A, a B, and a C down, which means we can't really unpick what's in here, unless we change that particular count and we look at the drop down being part of a 5-wave move. Okay, now if we were to assume a 5-wave move, we'd be looking at a 0 to 1, up for a 2, a 3, back 4, and down for a 5. Okay, now corrective moves don't happen in 5 moves down, and the reason that I'm not counting this rather than putting Elliott on is that I'm still unclear as to whether or not this is the ABC move down, or whether we could actually have a bigger pairing giving us a combo move of something that looks like this. Now, if we do go into a combo type move, we could easily see a zigzag, which is possibly the most common ABC type of move. But inside the zigzag, we would expect a move down being 5 waves, a push back up being 3 waves, and then a push down being another 5 waves to complete that, which gives us the zigzag overall, and then we can expect a move on up at the bottom of this. So for me, the monthly and the weekly are so confusing right now that they both have potentials and plays depending on whether or not it was completed as a 3-3, so a 3 weekly, 3 monthly, and then which one of the two it's likely to be. Again, because it's fractal, it can't really be both. So let's assume we've gone through the monthly and we're assuming that it was a 3 monthly, therefore giving us the ABC. We are now looking at an A, a B, a C. Okay, so that's option 1 on the table. Then we come into the weekly, and everything we've just covered on the weekly. Let's assume that this is currently the 3, and therefore the 3 coming down for the 4. We could actually see the first of the 2 options being bearish, giving us this zigzag type pattern, which means it's a 5, up for a 3, down for a 5. That's option 1. Okay, so we've got option 1 on the monthly, and we've got option 2 on the weekly. Now, option 2A, if you will, is now a bullish scenario on the weekly. Okay, so let's come into the bullish scenario on the weekly. Now, this is something that I go back all the way to March, and again, if you guys follow me, you'll know that I've used this example kind of time and time again. And the reason I keep using this example is that it's pretty much textbook in terms of that bigger picture. So I'm just going to flip over to this and show. If you come to the 18th of March, you'll actually see on this particular one, they blew up the rocket post. You'll actually see the calls and the moves on this particular one when it loads. And we're still loading. Okay, so this particular move, you know, the expectations were we were 3 on the weekly, which is what my assumption was. I was expecting the UTAD move, which was this one here. It actually went a little bit higher than first planned, which kind of a little bit frustratingly, because this, like I said, was textbook. It actually moved around $2,000 more, which meant C was actually a little bit higher by around 2,500. D was actually up back to the same kind of level I was expecting the B, and therefore E come in quite a bit faster, which was actually hovered around this level. So the levels were pretty solid. We've got a few areas of interest, which are these white lines here. This is something that we teach in Discord, so I'm not going to go into too much depth as to why I'm picking these out. But ultimately, playing this forward and just using this as the textbook example, you can clearly see going back all the way from the 18th of March, you know, the ideal call down, you know, and we are talking from 62,000, you know, yeah, 62,000 roughly, all the way down to the 30K drop. So it's a massive, massive move. I'm happy with how this has played out, and you'll see now in the next post how this actually fits together. So the assumption of this first tag of the 4 level could easily give us an accumulation pattern in here. Although this one's pretty ugly, this could give us an accumulation pattern taking us up now from the 4 to the 5 move, which is what I'm really looking at as, are we in there or not just yet? Now, you can see on the moves back up that we've actually respected both of these levels quite considerably. We've taken this as resistance, come back down off it, back up through it, used this as support, straight up to the next one as the second line of resistance, back down off it, up again to test it, back down off it, up. It's actually consolidated around this before breaking through, faking it out, and straight back down to that level. Now, this was actually on the 7th of September, and this call was made on the 18th of March. So you can see that this was clearly a level of respect, which is still actually valid today. So part of what I like about this is the fact that Bitcoin is becoming more and more institutionalized, and therefore I think it's a little bit clearer in terms of using some of these techniques. And like I said, these are the kinds of things that we teach in terms of Discord. So the next one was this particular roadmap. Now, what I've just said on the rocket call was that the assumption on this was down towards this image, that we would actually come off the weekly high 3, which is what my assumption was at the time. I'm still possibly favoring that, and I'll come into that in a second. But ultimately, the 3 to the 4 move down. So regardless of whether this is weekly or monthly, I'm not using Elliott to trade specifically. I'm using Elliott for my overall bias, and then using different techniques to enter in these particular trades once I'm comfortable that the bias is correct. So again, this particular post takes me all the way back to March. Again, this was March the 26th. You can actually see there, March the 26th. And the general idea that we would fall down into this particular channel before potentially making its move out. And I think the reason that I wanted to highlight this one as well is if I come back into this particular play and I turn that specific drawing back on from March, I'm going to come into what I've regarded as my weekly forecast. And you can see clear as day, we've actually come down into the channel as expected. And we've now started to move in and around and kind of up from the channel. But it's just a question of, are we actually finished? Kind of not so much in the channel, but are we finished in this particular ABC move as a potential play? And as soon as I get some kind of character trait on that, which could even be a test of this particular range, once I start to see the character of the tool, the instrument itself at this particular level, I'm going to work out whether or not this is a 3 monthly or weekly. At the moment, I'm not stressing about that because the bias is still pretty much the same. We've got monthly down from a B to a C, and we've actually got weekly down in terms of the current overbought stochastic. So one way or another, I'm kind of comfortable that this is coming down at the moment, and I'm not looking for a short-term entry. I'm looking for the long-term entry. This is more a buy and hold for me. But ultimately, working with some of the guys and I suppose trying to kind of give them a little bit of comfort as to what we're seeing and why. I'm just going a little bit deeper than I would usually go for myself personally. So if we were to assume that the option 1, let's kind of just summarize what we've seen so far. So option 1 monthly, given us the move 3 to 4, which is still likely possible. And at that particular point, breaking it down and breaking it down, we're actually currently in the B to C move of that 3 to 4 leg down on that monthly time frame. If we zoom in to the weekly and assume that this was a weekly 3 rather than a monthly 3, it would ultimately mean the monthly 3 is yet to come, and therefore we are likely to see this being the 4 weekly, and a 5 weekly could only take out potentially just above the current high before giving us a proper full-on bear channel on the way down, which would ultimately then be the 3 monthly up here. There's not like a three monthly up here at a very shallow extension, giving us then a deeper 4. So I can see the irony in this. I think if Composite Man was to play this, I've mentioned this several times in the last couple of streams, I think that would be quite, unfair for a lot of retail traders. But yeah, always expect the worst. So coming back to this one now, the option 2A that I mentioned earlier, which is basically the bullish scenario on this, and we're going to assume that the 4 is actually in, and we've actually got the 4 in down here. Now, a couple of things that I've seen other streamers, other YouTubers, etc., etc. I've seen other people, even TV posts on this, where ultimately the assumption is the bottom comes in here, and we now have a small, and we're going to come down to the daily time frame. Let me just get rid of this. Now, on the daily time frame, if we were to assume that we had the bottom in here, and this is again something that gives me a bit more comfort that I can't really unpick what happened from here across to here if we were to assume this now giving us the 0 leg. So that's the first thing, which means I kind of feel more comfort in the fact that we had this A, B, C, but ultimately we've had another move back up, which was actually over here almost immediately before coming back down, which gives us a 5, and therefore a 3 and a 5 move could actually give us something that looks then like this. So a 3, a 5, we're looking for potentially an extended flat type move, and therefore that still gives another potential scenario. I'm not going to go too deep into that one. That just gives us another option as to what we could be if we're still part of that much bigger move. Now, another part of what I suppose is kind of interesting, again, this could purely be based on, retail hype and just the eyeballs that are on this particular instrument. We could actually be seeing that if this was the end of the 4 and the start of the new bullish move up, we actually have not a very impulsive 3 move rather than 5. You'd expect Elliott to give us a deep pullback, go up for a 3, back down for a 4, and then up for a 5 extension, which means if I was to assume the 1, I would have liked to have seen this kind of level being my 1 rather than this level. So let's assume that it was kind of half bullish. There was a lot of fear in terms of the FOMO and the missing out. There was a lot of greed, which is still there. I laugh every time I think of institutional money and people assuming that the big boys come in and everybody gets rich. It's such a misconception. The big boys come in, we're in an unregulated market, and the big boys get richer and everybody else basically gets broke. And therefore I kind of feel that this is still a big question mark for me. There's a bigger question mark sitting in here unless this forms part of the bigger corrective move, as I'm suggesting. So there's this one and this one I don't like. The second thing is, now can we argue a 5 wave down? We got a 1, a 2, we could go 3, 4 with a longer 4 to 5. So yeah, that doesn't feel too good either, which means I don't like this, I don't like this, and we got a question mark there. So everything up to this point is kind of just a massive mess any which way I look at this. So if I was to say, okay, let's accept it for what it is, let's say that we are now bullish and we are ready to go. I think the bullish scenario for me, and the only bullish scenario at the moment, is if we were bullish in this particular move and we are 3 to 4, which means we are now 4 to 5 in this move and a smaller time frame move, we would actually be seeing something that looks a little bit like this. This would give us the 0 to the 1, back down for the 2. Now, question mark again could be 3, 4, and a 5, right? So that's kind of option 1. The second option would actually be the same 0, 1, 2 move, now giving us a potential 3, which has just come to here. This giving us the 4, but the 4 might not be in yet. And then the 5, like I said, would realistically be, and we have to be realistic, we can't just kind of live on this being hope that this goes all the way to the moon. I think ultimately, if we look at these kinds of levels, as long as we don't come down lower than 37, this move is still valid, whatever that high is there, again, not being very specific. If we look at the pullback on this retracement, we're going to go from the 2 to the assumed 3. It is a 38%. It's actually gone a little bit deeper, not quite 50, but it does qualify, which means if we see a little bit of a sideways move here, and we actually get some kind of spring in this, then all we're seeing is some kind of reaccumulation to take this to 5. But like I said, best case scenario, if this is the 5, we'd actually only look in with the fib extensions around roughly, if not a little bit more than the current all-time high. So, you know, I hope this makes a little bit of sense. I hope this, hasn't been too long-winded. It's very difficult to kind of cover the same topic, over and over and over again. But ultimately, this is just trying to break down some logic as to why we are, or potentially where we are, and how we can actually calculate, where we're actually going. And I feel at the moment, in any of these scenarios, we've got option one, the monthly bigger time frame, taking us, this is basically the B here, and we coming down for a C. So that's the first option. If we are weekly, then ultimately we're seeing a very similar thing. We're actually seeing an extended flat move here, which could have just ended, giving us now another move down to complete the bigger zigzag. So again, that's kind of down. If we are in this daily bullish move, then at the moment I don't feel this is done. We're going to kind of consolidate sideways a little bit longer, and we could easily expect a spring accumulation. That's kind of the rules, and therefore one way or the other at the moment I don't feel very impulsive in terms of a bullish move altogether. So they are the three realistic scenarios that I'm seeing. I've covered all the logic in the best that I can in terms of putting it into one, actual video. So again, I hope this makes a little bit of sense. I'm just going to cover what else was there in this, any of the other newer posts. Yeah, so in terms of some of the newer posts, I've put some education content together. You'll actually see, if you look at the Dow, the Wyckoff, Elliott, and Fibonacci, I've put a nice little post together in how they actually fit together. I'm still doing some drawing, so you can see some of the charts. They're just a bit more of, pure boredom when I'm waiting for some of these moves to happen. Again, another interesting one in terms of some cheat sheets. There's a couple of different sheets inside this, if you want to take a look at that. This one, again, quite interesting. I've used this. This is the first NFT that I made. But in essence, inside this, there's a little bit of info. If you come in and see this one, there's a little bit of info as to some of the potential smaller scale scenarios that I've covered as to why I think we are where we are and where we could be going. And then in terms of the NFT, I've actually just launched a second one. So this is the second NFT. Overall, I am bullish on this move. It's just a question of getting bullish at the right time for me. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this one. I'm going to leave it as it is for now, and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Cheers all.